And welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm very excited to host this webinar today where we are going to hear from a diverse set of leaders in both the public and private sectors about how they are approaching this new funding and technology eligibility in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to deliver benefits to communities in their states, cities, or regions. As we all know, this new law is investing over $500 billion in transportation investment, including new programs and eligibilities for technologies that many of our ITS America members and communities are very passionate about. Technologies that support connected and automated transportation, that promote mobility on demand, accelerate sustainable transportation solutions, and enable a host of other emerging technologies. At ITS America, we believe that these transportation innovations will help make the communities we live, work, and play in safer, greener, smarter, and provide broader, more equitable access for people, connecting them to jobs, healthcare, education, and opportunity. So I'm very pleased to have with us today leaders both from within ITS America and the industry at large. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. I'll introduce them each by name and title, and then I'll call on each of them to give some opening remarks. So first we have with us ITS America Chair and Secretary of the Washington State DOT, Roger Millar. We are also pleased to welcome Salita Reynolds, General Manager of Los Angeles DOT, Monali Shah, Head of Industry Solutions at Google, MJ Maynard, Chief Executive Officer of the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada, or RTC, as we call it for shorthand, and Chris Armstrong, Vice President of Cirrus and VitaX at Panasonic. So thank you all for joining us today. So now I'm going to ask all the panelists to turn on your cameras, please. And I'm going to offer the first question, which will be to each of you. So I'd like for each of you to take a couple of minutes, maybe showcase what your agency or company is doing, and then take about 5 minutes to share what outcomes you're trying to achieve in your community and how your organization is thinking about investing in these technologies, whether they be automated technologies, connected technologies, mobility on demand, smart infrastructure, sustainability, or some other emerging tech solution that is now eligible under the IIJA. And so with that, I will call first on Roger, please.
Thank you, Laura, and thanks for the opportunity to be here today. The Washington State DOT has been engaged in all of these spaces for quite some time, and it's just wonderful to see the federal government stepping in and being a player with policy and with funding. What we're looking at in our space is, first of all, sustainable maintenance and operations funding. A lot of people look at state DOTs as builders of stuff, but we're really stewards of complex multimodal systems that people take for granted. And so what we're working on is making sure that we keep working. Historically, there's been underfunding for life cycle preservation and asset management, including ITS systems. We have over $1 billion invested in ITS here in Washington State, and we don't have the resources to preserve and maintain it the way we should. We're also taking a collaborative approach and coordinating these different technology projects with all of the stakeholders in the space. There's some that are applied at a state level. There's some that are applied at a regional level. There's some that are more appropriately applied at the local level. And what we want to do is be a great partner in all of that. So we are here in Washington measuring everything we do with a climate change lens and an equity lens. Governor Inslee, my boss, has said that we're probably the first generation to really feel the effect of climate change, and perhaps the last that has an opportunity to do anything about it. So we're blending the IIJA money with the state money, and most of our budget is state funding, to decarbonize everything. So we're very involved in electric vehicle charging. And electric vehicles like our Washington State Ferries fleet. We have 21 big diesel gas hogs that we're converting to hybrid electric vehicles. We're working with our transit partners, large and small, on electrifying the public transportation fleet. we're working with partners all up and down the West Coast on the West Coast Electric Vehicle Highway System, and getting charging infrastructure, not just north and south along the coast, but moving east and west as well. And it's charging for cars, it's charging for light and heavy duty trucks, it's charging for bicycles, and making that happen. Another thing we're doing is recognizing that this is not about technologies, this is about outcomes for people. And so we're working really hard to talk about the transportation investments we're making in the context of social equity, in the context of land use and development patterns, and in the context of what our rather large footprint as human beings does on the natural environment. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Roger. I remember a conversation we had in Hamburg when we were discussing that Washington State, correct me if I'm wrong, has the second largest ferry system, I believe, in the world.
In the world, yeah.
Yes, and that is a unique challenge that you definitely face, in your decarbonization of the fleet. Okay, next I will ask MJ, please.
That's the new phrase, right? Let me unmute. Great to be here today. Thanks so much. Before we get started, just to, for those of you that are not aware of what we do here at the RTC, some people think RTC, oh, you're the bus people, and we are. We're also the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO. So in that role, we oversee the regional transportation planning process for Southern Nevada. We also work closely with the cities and the counties, so the local jurisdictions, to plan and fund all of the roadway projects here in the region. We are the traffic manager for Southern Nevada. We do that in collaboration with the Nevada Department of Transportation, the local jurisdictions. And then we also we implement and oversee the bike share program in downtown Las Vegas. So wear a lot of hats that make us, as a regional agency, I think pretty effective, because all those functions are under one roof. But I think similar to what Roger said, I think as an agency, we're really excited about the funding opportunities in the IIJA that relate to not only sustainability, but also safety, and even some new programs. The congestion relief program and the revolutionary transportation. So there's a couple of new programs that we think we'll tap into in our role as the traffic manager for the region. Safety is a big deal here. We've seen in the last decade, this is the worst year for traffic fatalities in our roadways. And we think we have an opportunity to invest in technology that I love the way Roger put it. It's not so much about the technology, but really about the outcome and how that affects people. And I think that the team is excited about going after advanced intersection analytics that will provide this real-time data that will look for problem areas on our roadways that identify speeding, red light running, some of those near miss occurrences. And then we can share that data with the cities and the county for potential improved roadway design engineering that could take place, potentially share that data with the various police agencies in order to help them with their enforcement efforts. We really think this technology and some of these new grant programs will have an opportunity again to reduce incidents and fatalities that are happening on our roadways right now in Southern Nevada. We're also exploring, and without the IIJA funding, we would not be able to advance our zero emission plan. Sustainability is a big deal in this region. And so we're looking to have a zero emission fleet by 2035. Obviously, we would not be able to do that without the funding, particularly the investment in infrastructure and the necessary charging units. And then as a region that has had autonomous vehicles operating in and around our resort corridor, otherwise known as the Las Vegas Strip, for the last 4 years, we work closely with a company called Motional, who in partnership with Lyft has been providing self-driving trips in mixed flow traffic. Over 100,000 trips have been taken with a fleet of 75 self-driving vehicles. And so we are looking forward to investing in a connected autonomous vehicle program to effectively manage the DSRCs and the C-V2X devices And then as an agency, we're also getting ready to implement our own autonomous vehicle program in downtown Las Vegas. So ensuring that built environment is there, not only for the autonomous vehicles, but we're looking for pedestrian detection technology improvements. And then we're also interested in tapping into the funding to continue to operate a mobility on demand program that we just recently implemented. And we're calling it a universal transit concept. And we are taking transit customers, paratransit customers, and students and putting them all in the same on-demand vehicle, picking them up at their house. They can hail that trip by way of phone, same day, or they can call in advance. We take them where they need to go within that zone, or for the paratransit customer, will actually take you to where you need to go outside of the zone. So again, it's managing the the customer expectation and ensuring that mobility on demand is another choice for people to make as they move about our community.
Yeah, thank you, MJ. And I just want to reiterate, your comment about safety and how important that is, especially at this moment where we do see a significant and alarming rise in fatalities. ITS America has long advocated for safety to be safe for technology, ITS technology, connected vehicle technology, right, automated vehicle technology to be a part of any safety plan. And we continue to maintain that it really is critical that this safe systems approach and this collective goal towards zero deaths. We really believe that technology is a key aspect of that. So appreciate your comments there. Chris, let's go to you next.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you for the opportunity to be here with you all today. I hope you're having a good morning or a good afternoon so far. Again, my name is Chris Armstrong. I'm a vice president at Panasonic. I represent a strategic business group in the United States that is very focused on connected vehicle technology, as well as transportation electrification. As you all may know, Panasonic is a very large global company. We have about 250,000 employees across the world. It's often said that some type of Panasonic product touches 1 billion lives every single day. And so we're very fortunate to have a wide breadth and depth of impact across the world. And one of our founding principles at our company, one of the 7 founding principles, the first one is contribution to society. And one of the things I'm quite excited about with IIJA is the fact that, Roger mentioned this, a lot of what we do with this investment is going to need to be outcomes-based. It's going to need to be focused on contribution to society. And within our businesses at Panasonic, I'm particularly excited about the significant increase in federal research around transportation technologies. I'm also thrilled about the efforts that all of us can make to have an impact on climate change with transportation electrification and other initiatives. At Panasonic, we're trying to leverage our global position across many different domains to bring groups together to collaborate in transportation that maybe haven't done so historically to the full extent possible. On the electrification side, we view that as bringing major fleet providers that are transitioning their fleets to electric and utilities together. There's going to be big changes on both sides to enable that type of innovation that this funding mechanism will really help with if we get it right. But it's going to require industry collaboration like we haven't had necessarily before in this specific domain. And then on the connected vehicle side, that's the business that I lead in particular. We are really excited about the increase in grant opportunities and funding opportunities to broaden and scale technology, specifically connected vehicle technology. Pedestrian and bicycle initiatives have become eligible for this type of tech and these types of projects. And we're really excited about being able to tackle some of those problems because I think all of us see it. We have this scary and increasing problem with vulnerable road users across our country. And I think this funding mechanism is giving us a tool to take that very seriously and act on it very quickly. In terms of the way we are viewing, much of this opportunity, we're trying to break it down in 3 horizons because we know we can't accomplish everything overnight, at least from our perspective at Panasonic. That first horizon we want to focus on is leveraging these investment opportunities for efficiency. There's no better time than when you are repaving a roadway, you are building a new roadway, than to invest in technology then. You can lay fiber so much easier. You can hang devices so much easier. If you have the opportunity through these funding mechanisms to bring technology along for the ride with your capital investments, we would really encourage you to do that for efficiency purposes, and we'd love to be a part of that. Our second horizon is very focused on equity, and that's why I mentioned the pedestrian, bicycle, and vulnerable road user opportunities within these funding mechanisms, because they are big dollars and they are big infrastructure projects. And I think we need to be sure not to leave vulnerable road users by the wayside. And then lastly, if we really construct these pieces together effectively and we take a system level view, we can have serious outcomes for our environment. And we think that there are a lot of opportunities across all of the aspects of IIJA that will help us make progress and address climate change. As Roger put it, this might be our last chance. So let's be sure we get this right. Thanks so much, Laura.
Thank you, Chris. Couldn't agree more on many of your comments, including this opportunity to really build in that digital infrastructure into the physical infrastructure that's going to be built. Salita.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. And it's great to be here with y'all. Really appreciate getting a chance to learn from all of these fantastic panelists who I admire quite a bit. So at LADOT, just a thumbnail sketch of what we do. I mean, LA is huge. So we manage and operate about 7,500 miles of streets. We have about 37,000 parking meters. We also, a little known fact is we operate the largest municipal transit system in the region after Metro. We carry about 22 million people every year on our buses and paratransit vehicles, and now taxis. Speaking of which, we also regulate and oversee for-hire transportation. We have the largest micromobility program in North America with scooters and bikes. And we also just this week passed a gigantic set of taxi reforms. This is the first set of reforms to happen since the 80s. And it took about 8 years to get here. And it's really enabled by new technology and new tools that we have at our disposal to be able to assure our city council and the taxi industry and public that we can regulate this industry towards smarter and better outcomes for folks. So, you know, when we think about, we're very lucky. We live in a self-help county. So we have an evergreen 1 cent sales tax measure that goes towards transportation. We have somewhat healthy funding that comes from the state as well. And we have, you know, a governor and a legislature that took a very politically courageous act in increasing fees for drivers to generate funding to go into maintenance and build out of transportation facilities. And we're really excited by what this Congress and USDOT has accomplished here with this Transportation Infrastructure Act. But it's still not enough, right? So we have to prioritize, and our prioritization really for us, kind of the big organizing framework is an idea called universal basic mobility. So people may be familiar with universal basic income, which is the idea that you get sort of a reliable safety net of cash on a monthly basis. Universal basic mobility recognizes that transportation is often the reason why people cannot, reach their goals and aspirations every day when they wake up. Those goals may be that they just want to get to work, they want to get a new job, they want to graduate from school, they want to be great parents, they want to meet the love of their life, they want to get something to eat. Whatever those goals are, transportation standing in the way of individuals being able to reach their full potential and get the most out of their lives is something that we want to eliminate. And we know that in Los Angeles, a city dominated by freeways and cars, those sort of barriers are not distributed equitably. So in particular, low-income neighborhoods, Black neighborhoods, brown neighborhoods throughout Los Angeles are the places where those challenges are the most acute. They're the most acute for women. They're the most acute for people with disabilities. So when we focus on how we're going to invest and where we're going to invest, it's with that as our North Star. And we think about these 3 buckets. The first one is physical infrastructure and services. So as an example, we did a study on the transportation needs of women and girls in Los Angeles, and discovered that it would be really meaningful for women in particular if they could get the bus driver to stop closer to their destination when it's dark outside. So making even small adjustments to the physical infrastructure we deliver is powerful, but we also are suffering from the same kind of continued an unacceptable status quo of people walking and biking, getting killed and injured on our streets. So physical infrastructure really has to be the place where we begin. So we're really encouraged by USDOT's shift to a safe systems approach, and new funding streams opened up specifically for those purposes. And we've been able to achieve some wins in the state. Again, just this week, we rolled back speed limit increases on 178 miles of streets in Los Angeles because we were able to finally start to chip away at the 85th percentile speed rule, which has long sort of governed how we set speed limits in California. The second bucket is digital services and infrastructure. And here's where we have some really exciting opportunities, but I think still some advice, input, and nudging of USDOT to come along with us. Los Angeles launched the mobility data specifications, which is really the way that we think we are going to manage the digital version of the physical infrastructure that we currently use. But what we found when we applied for a grant from USDOT is that even though digital infrastructure is eligible in name, when you look at the actual formulas that folks at federal highways or other grants programs use to rank grant applications, digital infrastructure just doesn't score. So, and it doesn't score as well as physical infrastructure. So we think there are really opportunities here to dig down into the maybe less sexy parts of bureaucracy. I mean, they're sexy to me, of course, because I love this stuff, but that's really what's required is for us to think deeply. If we're going to see transformative change come out of this infrastructure bill and bringing cities up to being on equal footing with, private companies and product companies, we have to kind of untangle some of those threads so that we can really unlock the full potential of the funding to get us there. And then the last bucket is community services and infrastructure. And here we do specifically mean things like broadband implementation, but we also mean funding things like workforce development. We are suffering a crisis of human capital right now, and we're also suffering a crisis of extreme burnout among public servants who just carried us on their backs through an extraordinarily difficult period. We made transit service free. We froze people's parking fines. We implemented a lot of financial relief programs for people with their parking tickets. We opened one of the biggest testing sites in the United States, and then one of the largest vaccination sites of the United States. But throughout that period, we were also experiencing a hiring freeze and early separation incentives that have left most departments in the city of Los Angeles with vacancy rates around 20%. So, as we consider how we can invite in the next generation of people to serve the public, I really want to encourage USDOT to consider how we fund workforce development and real positions in city government, as well as 30-year assets that are made of concrete and steel.
Well, you're speaking about a lot of things that I'm very passionate about. Workforce development is obviously high among them, but also your point about the digital infrastructure and how we value that and how we score that is really critical and top of mind to everything we're talking about today. Manali.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm getting all energized just listening to each of you speak before I share some of my thoughts. And and I actually want to build on a lot of what Salita just shared. I think it is such an exciting time for us, and we have this opportunity to re-envision the way that we approach transportation. But at the same time, as Roger mentioned, there's a lot of just the backlog of the maintenance and all the things that that need to be done, that they're in that whole notion of like, how do we prioritize, right? Because there's the opportunity to reinvent and re-envision, and then there's all the backlog of things that are there. And so I think that this is where some of the opportunity comes in for all of us to think about taking a data-driven approach to really understanding how to prioritize investments and bring in some of these new lenses. And so the way that we're thinking about it, very similar to Salita, what you just described, is there's an opportunity to invest in the physical infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, and the workforce. And I think while we naturally think about the physical infrastructure, I think it's important for us to step back and challenge ourselves to look at where are there opportunities for some flexibility to take some of the funding and put it into some of these other areas that are not considered as traditional funding investments, because the focus is often on the physical side. And so the way that we've been thinking about it is Google. If you think about Google, taking data-driven approaches is really at the core of what we do. And then also making it really simple and easy to take all this data and make sense of it. And so as we've been working with different agencies, what we're doing is bringing some of these new lenses, right? Like we know that safety and prioritizing where can we really move the needle and how do we focus investments to improve safety? How do we bring in the new lens of understanding climate resilience and what are the risks? How are they impacting the built environment? And understanding that in a way that's really easy to consume into operational and planning decisions. And then the third area is the equity. And we've built what we call an equity index to be able to take a data-driven approach to understand what is the impact on different communities with any of these topics, whether it's safety, whether it's access to transportation, access to opportunity, the impact of climate risks and that vary by region. What are those impacts on different communities? And so as we're working with different agencies, we're saying, let's bring together the power of these different types of lenses in a way that helps drive decisions leveraging data. And I think that helps. Right now, what we see often is that it's hard because these things are kind of there in pockets, or they're done as a point in time type of study. And so we're working with agencies to help take this kind of point in time and maybe siloed approach and bringing this continuous insight to help make these decisions and help prioritize where do we make these investments. So if we really want to move the needle, bring in capabilities like Google Earth Engine and climate risk modeling and say, where are these risks most intense? How is that going to evolve in the future? So where do we need to think about investing in terms of the infrastructure? How do we make different design choices? How do we look at how communities are impacted differently? And we bring all this data together and in a way that is easy to consume. And one of the things as we talk about different stakeholders, we know that everyone doesn't have, everyone's not a data scientist or like an expert, right? So we need to surface the information in ways that are easy for people to consume the information and make decisions on it. And so that collaboration also between the state, between the cities, the counties, and making that shareable and easy to understand and enabling that collaboration is something that we've been focused on. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to really aim our investments and look at where do we really get the most mileage, knowing that all the money that's coming in, while it's great, it's not going to be able to satisfy all the needs. So that prioritization, I think, is a really important aspect in making that easy for people.
Thank you, Manali. I think, another perennial topic for our industry is this concept of how do you turn all this data into actionable, usable information to make decisions. And I think that's really going to be key for us all to be working on collectively with the investments in this act. So I want to go to the next question. But just for the panelists, I do want this to be a discussion. So I'm going to throw it out. I'm not going to assign it to anyone. So please feel free to all jump in. So it actually is a discussion. And the next question is, all of you touched on partnerships and entities that you need to be working with. And we know it takes regional collaboration with, quite frankly, all of you on this call, state agencies, local transportation agencies, MPOs, transit community members, technology companies, to create and implement a successful technology program. So my question is, how are each of you working to develop partnerships with other private and public sector organizations to help deliver these technologies?
So Laura, I'll start. At the RTC, we have embraced the public-private sector model for a long time. I mean, it's really embedded in how we run our organization. Everything from contracting with the private sector to deliver our transit services, to contracting with or partnering with tech companies to help us improve our operations or enhance the customer experience, or even more importantly, to help us expand our technology learning curve. Sometimes that we need that push, right? We are not the experts. Sometimes as a public sector agency, we just don't have the resources. And so when we get an opportunity to partner with the private sector, that even if it's emerging technology, again, sometimes it's one of those who moved my cheese moments, right? We're a little hesitant to do something that we're not aware of. It feels like, how do we explain to our elected officials? How do we explain to the community? But we have found great success, again, in having the private sector assist us, not only outside of our comfort zone, but to really learn more, to be more effective as an organization. And an example that we like to use, because it's true, and I think it's something that we are building upon. A few years ago, we had a small startup tech company come to the RTC, and this tech company said, "Hey, you have a problem, and we have a solution potentially." And the problem was really the ability for in our role again as traffic manager, the notification and response time to incidents that were occurring on the freeways. So we partnered public sector, so Nevada Department of Transportation, Department of Public Safety, our Highway Patrol, and this tech company, who back in the day was called Waycare, today they're Recor. And this company was able to bring technology to our operations center that we just didn't know existed. And whether it was that machine learning, it was AI, predictive analytics, and it was so successful, this one-year pilot, that company is now part of our. It's a program. They are really part of our operating, the way that we manage the TMC, or the Traffic Management Center here at the RTC. So I think for us, it's not only understanding that the private sector can bring resources to the public sector. I think when we both sit at the table and solve the most important question is, what's the problem we're trying to solve for, rather than creating a problem that we can solve, I think it's very beneficial. And understanding which each partner is responsible for and who's going to deliver what, I think has worked out really well. And we're very sensitive to the fact that the private sector they're supposed to make money. I mean, that's part of their function. And so it's understanding that these partnerships aren't just fly by night. It's just not a small pilot for 90 days or 6 months, but that we're invested in their investment, and invested in hopefully ensuring that pilots can turn into programs, and then we can share those programs with others that want to replicate what is that we're doing. So we've found a lot of success with public and private sector partnerships here at the RTC.
Yeah, we're working on developing some trust. I've been at this for a while, and I started out in city government, and I've been in city government, I've been in county government. I ran an MPO for a while, and then I worked in the not-for-profit world and in the private sector. And everybody's got their perceptions of the others. And when I came to the Washington State DOT, I remembered back when I ran an MPO and when I was in the city, and the DOT was this monolithic bunch of dumb highway engineers trying to tell me what to do. And I told my team that we need to get out and be a part of the team. We belong. to every metropolitan planning organization, every RTPO. And so actively engage in the planning that's going on in there. And when the plan is adopted, that plan is our plan. That freaked every MPO in the state of Washington out, that, oh my goodness. So we're working on building trust. We have an MPO RTPO group, and our region administrators meet monthly with all the MPOs and the RTPOs talking about planning and trust and the like. We had a commute trip reduction program that was an answer to air quality. And we've turned that into a 24/7, 365 transportation demand management mission. And we have an executive board that's made up of public and private executives, people from the utilities, people from the public health sector. It's one of a small Washington mom and pop Amazon is there at the table. And we're talking about how we work together in this space. We in Washington are a Dillon state. And so local government only has the authorities that the state legislature grants them, which is different from home rule states. And so we're looked at as subject matter experts to that legislature on things like the mobility data specification. People were, we want to make sure that we're addressing the privacy issues, that we're addressing other issues in good faith. And that's why we are so actively engaged in organizations like ITS America, because it gives you an opportunity to partner in a place before it becomes about money and winners and losers. So the key to this in my mind is transparency and just building that trust to move forward as a team. Because our customers, the people of Washington State, they don't know if they're on a city street, a county road, a DOT facility, and they don't care. They're trying to live their lives, and our job is to make that better.
Laura, I've got a couple interesting examples that I've been very fortunate to engage in. One of them is MJ referenced this, but as a private company, it's not that we have to be profitable immediately. We just need to see a path to scale and opportunity. And as we really greatly improve our ability to maintain and implement standards within our transportation industry, it's come a really long way from where it was before. I think we have a chance, especially under the context of IIJA, of looking for collaboration beyond our immediate borders and lines around our cities and counties and towns and states even. We might find collaboration, standards-based collaboration from completely different regions across the country. I look at things like Connected Vehicle Pooled Fund Study, or recent efforts that ITE has been leading with support from the federal government that's bringing states like Georgia and Ohio and Utah together to work on things. And the opportunity that I see in those partnerships is sort of a rising tide raises all ship opportunity. A private company is looking for that scale, and we just need to see a path from pilot to program. It's not a promise, it's a path, right? And we have just as much responsibility to prove ourselves. And partnerships are really key to that. The other thing is I've seen a lot of creativity in what gets you from pilot to program. We are very fortunate to be engaged in partnerships in Georgia that include ourselves, a car company, an automotive company, a philanthropic organization, and the public government, both local and state. And we do not understand each other super well, but we work through it. And we have had some really great successes. And those successes have now united us together, understanding each other much better. So partnerships break down barriers, in my view. They break down misunderstandings. And I think that's going to be critical with some of the very big issues that IIJA is trying to solve.
I was just going to add that to Rod and build on Roger's point about trust, and just say, I think we have a really long way to go, because I think there is still real partnership requires shared risk taking, and it requires radical honesty about what's really at stake for each entity that's at the table. And like any partnership, it's not, these are not greenfields partnerships, right? The public and private sector have been trying to partner with each other for a long, long time. And there's a lot of baggage there. A lot of, legitimate criticisms on both sides about the actions of the entity on the other side. So one of the things that frustrated me when I first got this job is just the endless string of vendors who would show up with a product they had already developed, right? We were way downstream in the product development cycle. They had never come and talked to me and asked me if it was a problem I was trying to solve. They just had a product. And when you started to dig into what the actual, product would do, a lot of times a shared characteristic was the creation of value for shareholders through the accumulation of data and IP in a black box that was really, in some cases, amounted to me sort of turning over the management of public right-of-way to a private entity in a vendor lock-in kind of a situation. So I really wanted to solve that because it's very, very clear that being innovative and nimble is something that the private sector is really positioned to do well, and playing a long game as an investor towards policy outcomes is something the public sector does really well. So, over time, what I've tried to do is actually create independent spaces. So the Open Mobility Foundation is an example, Urban Movement Labs is an example, independent entities where public and private are together co-designing solutions and actually trying to do things, in the case of the OMF, in open source, right? So that everybody can see and everybody can contribute. Or in the case of Urban Movement Labs, private entities being able to come and test out their products or demonstrate their products or prove their products in the city of LA, which is priceless marketing for them, in a way that is consistent with the problems I really want to solve, or the port really wants to solve, or the airport really wants to solve. And I would love for us to continue to joyfully and expansively try and create new forums and new places that call forward new methods of collaboration, co-design, et cetera. And I think that one of the things the federal government has done over the last 10 years or so is to acknowledge that federal procurement rules really, they really have a chilling effect on the R&D cycle and innovation. Because if you cannot begin a federal procurement cycle until you get the federal money, then what you've done is put your project on a 3 to 5 year timeline, at which point the technology moves so fast that it's probably your window is gone. So opening things like their sandboxes that they've opened, allowing public entities to come in with partners already selected, whether that is to purchase an electric bus or to install a system of new ways of understanding safety problems that identify near misses, for example, instead of collisions after the fact. For safety interventions, those kinds of opportunities are things that I want to see the federal government do more of. And I would love to see us sort of, for trust to grow in a relationship, we each have to give something up, right? The public sector has to give up a little control. The private sector has to give up a little bit of the sort of opaqueness of what they're doing and how they're doing it. So, those are, I think, that's what I think USDOT can do, and sort of the roles that we all have to play and the opportunities that I think there are, if we can see them as such. Those little nascent accelerators and innovation labs that are sort of popping up all over the place, they require investment for sustainability, or they will go the way of the pilots. They'll start up and they'll be exciting for a minute, and then they'll never reach their full potential. So, all of the private companies listening, sort of as you're sort of making assessments about your investments and what's of value to you, I just want to lift up those kinds of opportunities as having direct value to this kind of collaboration, which can grow the pie for everybody.
Salita, I will, go ahead, Madam J, please.
Well, I was going to say, what I wanted to address what Salita said, because I totally agree. The risk risk that we take as a public sector agency versus the risk that the private sector, it's both risk, right? There's risk associated with both, but it's different. Just because, of course, we report, at least here for me, I report to 8 elected officials that represent the region, and they're all going to take it a certain way. But I think it's really important to get out in front of whatever you're going to do and say, it's okay to fail too, right? That's part of the whole learning process. This pilot particularly, it may be something that, again, that especially if it's emerging technology, that there's a chance that it may not yield the results that we wanted, but I think sometimes that's just as important as an outcome of, we all agreed that X was going to happen, and it does. And so I think, again, it's, I have found the best way to ensure that relationship, whether it starts in pilot or program, is to have some really tough conversations up front. I've seen proposals by the private sector that we just took, a scope of work that was 3 pages. There was no way that in this time frame that all those deliverables were going to happen. So I think it's when I say hire to your weakness, we also we look for partnerships that sort of fill in the gaps of our weakness, and we identify what we don't know, but we make sure, to your point, Salita, that we have that our risk managed, because our risk feels very, very different because it's so public facing than it is for the private sector. So I just wanted to give you a nod on that, because I totally agree with you.
And
I thought maybe I'll say a couple of things. And I love the co-creation, because I think that's when we really get the outcomes that we want. And I think there's a couple of things that you all mentioned. One is that building trust. And I think part of the way we've been working with agencies is by bringing that data-driven approach and surfacing that information so that there is a common understanding. And I think that's part of the challenge. Is every corner of the world, depending on where you're sitting and what angle you're coming, you have a different lens on it. So being able to have a shared understanding based on data is one thing that helps. And that's not the only thing, but that's an important foundation. And I think the other aspect is that ability to engage community and different stakeholders and bring them into the conversation. And I think that's something that has been challenging in the past and maybe kind of more siloed. And so as we've worked with cities, we've been working on ways where we're more helping them be more inclusive and engage communities across different languages, across different surfaces, whether it's, web, mobile, voice, but having more channels of engagement and reaching out to those voices that have not traditionally been a part of the process, and engaging them and creating that transparency and that trust by both of these things, by bringing data and making it easy for people to understand, like, here's the picture of it. Now let's see, what do we do about it? How do we interpret it? And then bring in those other voices. And I think those are 2 practical ways that we can create more of that trust and transparency.
If I could just add one thing to what Manali said, data-driven decision-making, our decision-making is values-driven. It's data-informed, but it's values-driven. And that's the thing that we've had the most difficulty explaining. The technology is usually the easiest part of the problem. When we launched the Mobility on Demand Alliance, the technology, everybody was talking about the tech. I was like, oh, okay, great. What about labor disruption? What about the Americans with Disabilities Act? What about social and racial equity? Are we developing technology for rich white people or for everybody? And that got a very different conversation going. And for business to succeed in partnership with government, We do need that procurement reform. Absolutely. The techniques that you buy toilet paper and asphalt with don't work in the tech space. But business has to understand that, I don't make decisions. My governor, who got a lot more votes than I did, he makes decisions. My legislature makes decisions. I provide advice. And a lot of that decision making is values based. And you need to understand the values of the communities you're working with to be successful.
I will just thank you all for your very honest comments. I hear joyful co-creation, which I love, and actually we heard co-creation in our conversations back in Charlotte in December, and I think I think it's really important. For a while now, I've heard from our public sector members just what Roger Salita and JL said, which is the private sector really needs to understand our values as a city, as a planning agency, as a state, and really be working towards our values. And to Chris and Manali's point, being able to come to the table together and have that collaboration, I think is really key to this. And I just want to make one shameless plug for the LA World Congress in September, because Salita mentioned Urban Movement Labs and LA taking that step of creating this environment where private mobility companies can come and test on their streets as long as their solution ties into one of Los Angeles's key problems that they're trying to solve for their community. And so we will be showcasing that at the World Congress in September. So if you haven't marked your calendars, please do. So let's move on to the next, the next question. This question is something I think we've all heard a lot of discussion from USDOT and just in our communities in general. And it's about how do we ensure that communities that truly need the resources in the IIJA actually get them. And that comes down to how do we as an industry, and how should the federal government be supporting these communities who don't maybe have the resources to write and administer the grants, and develop coalitions so that they can actually benefit from these emerging technologies and these opportunities in IIJA.
Okay, I'll go first. Writing a grant is not easy, right? I mean, it really is. It takes a certain skill set. It takes a certain bandwidth to get that done. Just from what we've learned with the IIJA, taking a regional approach is going to make a grant application more competitive. And so we'll continue to do what we've always done, and it's trying to bring as many folks under the tent that bring different resources to the potential project. We have found success in that regard, whether it's again, the private sector, it's the business community, it's nonprofits, or university. So I think, again, it's understanding what it is that you don't know or what you don't have, and trying to find that with it. And sometimes it's really difficult. You think you're going to find it in a community, and sometimes you don't. I mean, I think that it would be very beneficial, maybe it's this aspirational goal, and to have at some point, and I think this is something that maybe the CAT Coalition, the Cooperative Automated Transportation Coalition, is trying to do, or maybe a version of it, is to create this sort of one-stop shop repository where there are best practices, there are resources available, lessons learned that could be beneficial. But I do think this is a tough one, because I think agencies that even have the resources sometimes struggle in getting those grants written off the ground. Many times the timeline, it's in 3 weeks, it's due, and everybody's rushing to the red light to get it done. So I don't know, aside from some agencies organizations have the funding to consult the private sector to assist, but I think it's a real problem that you're going to find in every community, whether it's public sector or private sector, in again, having the bandwidth to get those grants written in that timely manner. So it's we'll always be the first to raise our hand and say we need some assistance, but it would be nice at the national level at least on the public sector. What I love about working in this space is that we share everything, right? And I came from the private sector and we didn't. So it's really nice that we get an opportunity to say, hey, this didn't work well, don't do this, or this person can help you. But I think having a national conversation at some point, and I know that, again, that's probably easier said than done, I think would be very beneficial to organizations that don't traditionally have the resources.
was just going to say, I think there's actually a really rich discussion to be had here about what the right role is for different levels of government, right? That I think the resources that a WashDOT has, especially under Roger's very wise leadership, are absolutely essential for small and rural communities to get access to some of these dollars. And there are some of these programs where it absolutely makes sense to have regional or statewide coordination occurring because you want consistency. And then sometimes that, and I think that the same is true for MPOs, providing that technical assistance or county transportation authorities, technical assistance, or even grant writing assistance. LA County has 88 cities in it. Los Angeles is obviously the biggest one, but then, there are some that are quite small. The city of San Fernando out in the valley, or, even some of the cities out in the desert. They are absolutely communities that are interested in welcoming some of these implementations, particularly around charging, a network of charging infrastructure for electric vehicles. That has to be coordinated at a state level, because if you are using an electric vehicle, or if you operate a transit system that relies on electric vehicles, or you have to have some reliability, and there has to be some consistency. And then sometimes that can kind of run amok, right? Where we have that can add to an already pretty heavy administrative burden. MJ's, writing the grant is hard. Administering the grant is harder. And is not something you can outsource to a consultant as a moment in time opportunity. It's something you have to do. And the learning curve is really steep. So, communities that already have those kinds of skills in-house don't need as much oversight, intervention, or assistance from the county or the state. And in some cases, because we're talking about federal and public money here, the way that the state or the county upholds their their fiduciary duty actually doesn't make sense at all for interfering or intervening in small scale infrastructure projects in cities where those skill sets already exist. And then actually you create a lot of frustration, which, to Roger's earlier point, can actually undermine or even dissolve bonds of trust that you've started to build between all of these different levels of government. So I don't think we have it right yet, but equity among cities is an essential conversation. And it's really important for actors in the private sector who both want to sell their products broadly and also want consistency among different levels of government around technology, regulation, and rulemaking. And there's a balance to be struck there. But I think we haven't quite gotten there yet. But it's very clear that the road to funding is paved with partnerships.
I completely agree. And there are DOTs and there are DOTs. Just like there are cities and there are cities and counties and MPOs and the like. And I think one thing that our federal partners could do would be to highlight best practices and good examples, and good, not just in delivery, but in partnering. And where are those things happening? Because some of this stuff, as Salita said, is absolutely appropriate on a state scale. An awful lot of it is regional. And even out here in the West, where the regions are bigger, I've got at least three multi-state regions that I deal with. The economic shed of Spokane or Walla Walla or Vancouver, or Blaine. We have international regions that we need to take into consideration, and some of it's very local. But we provide technical assistance to local governments. We run about $500 million a year through our local programs office, and we run even more money through our public transportation office to the small transit agencies. The relationships exist. There are good examples around the country. There are toxic examples too. What I would hate to see us do is say, okay, we've passed this bill. Now let's stop and figure out how we're going to do this. There are people already doing it. So let's take advantage of where people are doing it right and let everybody else know that this is what's going to get you the grant. And let's provide the support that we need to provide, and recognize, as I said earlier, the public doesn't care which agency gets the money. The public is concerned about, am I safer? Is it greener? You know, those are the things that the public cares about.
Yeah, I thought I'd take a moment too to prop up ITS America in this conversation as well. Like Salita highlighted some of the challenges of formula funding earlier as it relates to digital infrastructure. Roger can probably point all of us to countless best practices from around the nation. Whether it's like a challenge you're experiencing directly with the way you've had to tackle or manage or go after funding, or whether it's a best practice that you think has worked really well. You know, we're all fortunate to be a part of this very strong organization that I think does a good job having its ear to the ground and bringing those conversations directly to the decision makers, because there's a lot to be worked out about how IIJA is going to be implemented. And there's an opportunity window, you know, to share our thoughts, our inputs, our ideas, and even influence as to how those things happen.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone. I think that's incredibly important. I appreciate the shout out to ITS America. We do try to encourage our members to share your own experiences with us as well, so we can then share them out. And Roger, to your point, I think, leadership matters. This just shows how much leadership matters, because you are a state that is saying, be a part of the team. And that's important, and that sets a tone. And so I think it's incredibly important as we're talking about these partnerships and collaborations. Let's go on to the next question here, which I want everyone to sort of, look into your mini crystal ball, maybe 5 to 10 years down the road. And, where do you believe investments in technology should be focused now in order to support your goals for future mobility in your community?
Maybe I'll start off and build on, I think, something Salita mentioned early on. I think one of the things that sometimes we don't think about as much is the workforce development side. And I think that's a critical thing for us to be thinking about. There's the 3 different types of infrastructure we talked about. And that's one where just talking with so many leaders across the industry in the public sector, there's staff shortages, people leaving, it's hard to retain talent. And so being able to build the skills of the workforce and also make it easier for them to do their jobs and have a lot of the modern tools and technologies, so that all those kind of manual steps often that are there that make it difficult, that we can make it easier for them. And so I think that's something that we don't traditionally think about in terms of investment, but I think that's something that there's a real opportunity for us to look at the investment in the workforce and building up the skills and making it an attractive place to work, because I think the reason that people want to work in public sector is because of that, the values and the impact, Roger, that you mentioned. And so I think that's really motivating, but making it easier and having that kind of path to building skills and leveraging modern tools and technology so that they can feel that, oh yeah, I can deliver on that mission and the impact that I want to. So I think that's a big opportunity that often we don't talk about as much, because we focus on more of the physical infrastructure and the new services and the new shiny objects. But I think that's something that I would call out.
Yeah, I want to see the technology deployed in a way that, again, is outcome focused. The technology, we need to harness technology. We don't need to put technology's harness on. And so I want to decarbonize the transportation space as much as the next person, but a highway jammed with autonomous electric vehicles is still a highway jammed. And the fact that many low-income people cannot live where they want to live, they're living on the periphery of town where we cannot provide services. So these outcomes have to go beyond the transportation space to thinking about what is the relationship between where people live and where they work, and can we optimize that using technology? What can we do for resource extracting communities where the mines closed down, the lumber mill's gone, the fish, to bring economic vitality into that space so that people don't have to come necessarily to the big city to do what they want to do. We need to be thinking about everything we do in a context, and thinking about the different modes of transportation, cooperating with and advancing our housing goals, our education goals, our other goals as we move forward as a community and as a society.
I'll just say to talk about, so yes, plus 100 to everything Manali and Richard said, Roger said. But I also wanted to add a plug for payment platforms technology. As we think about how to solve the challenges we have with people who are unbanked, people who don't have access to credit, people who have been absolutely, totally, and utterly left behind by the last 50 years of transportation infrastructure, which really is for people who can afford to own and maintain and keep a car. It's the back-end payment platforms that are going to inhibit us, because transit agencies have these giant legacy systems. There's a lot of vendor lock-in there. The private sector has their systems. At the state or the federal level, we have got to solve that if we have any chance of getting to something like universal basic mobility. We in the transportation space, we were way ahead of our time in like the 90s and the early aughts with collapsing different transit agencies' fares into these little plastic cards that many of us use in big cities. But now we have to make another big leap forward and recognize that that's now holding us back from some of the things that we hope and dream to accomplish. People being able to use debit cards that we distribute as their direct payment onto transit, to get access to an EV car sharing car, to get access to a bike share bike. All of these things, I think, are really, again, it's one of those things that's way back in the background and in the weeds, but there is a need for both regulatory and procurement and technology reform that I think can only really be accomplished at some of the higher levels of government. And then I'll also say the build out. So the mobility data specifications are really a misnomer. It's not so much about data. It's about cities having an access to a set of APIs that can allow us to express our policies to the private sector in a way that is easily integrated into a product development cycle. And the Open Mobility Foundation just launched the curb data specifications, which will now allow us to do that at the curb. There has to be some federal investment in the build out and growth of the tools in those spaces for cities to be able to keep up with the private sector and to avoid the utter privatization of our public rights of way by big technology platforms. So I think those things are where I would point to. One, to solve a pain point around racial equity, and the other to solve a pain point around the right balance between the public sort of caretaking of the public right of way for public good and private interests to maximize their access to customers and markets in big cities.
So I did want to go back to what Manali said. I think workforce development, we're wringing our hands right now. This is sort of this year of contrast. We have, thanks to the infrastructure bill and all the stimulus funds, we have money in the bank, but we can't expand our services right now. We're actually reducing our services because we don't have the drivers, right? There's a huge labor shortage. And you think, well, just, throw more money at them. That's not necessarily the answer. And I think when you look at, and I don't know, Roger, if this is what you said earlier, maybe it was on another call, that many times the grants that are available are really capital centric rather than human capital centric. So you can get that funding to bring that that whatever that project is, but many times it's there's not enough for operations and there's not enough for this. And I think that given that this infrastructure bill is focused on climate action, modernization, safety, equity, that would drill down into more opportunities for workforce development as you look at that human technology for the future. I haven't seen a lot of that in this bill. But I do think it's important, and this is just, again, what we're experiencing here in RTC because we wear multiple hats. It's ensuring that technology keeps up with the built environment is preparing for the here and the now, but also for the future. And I think we're not seeing a lot of that, or we're seeing that there are a lot of gaps. One city may be all over it versus another city. And to the points everyone's made today, our customers and constituents lead regional lives. When they cross from one city to another, they don't know that they invested in something and they did not, unless of course they've got that a car that eventually is going to be connecting to pedestrian detection, and there's going to be that back and forth infrastructure and communication between vehicles and the built infrastructure. So I think ensuring that there's an investment in that now going forward, and that that's going to take collaboration. And then I also think it's funny, I spoke to a group last night and I asked them to raise their hand how many were concerned about climate and where it's going. Every single person in that room raised their hand. And I think that has to be a front and center priority in terms of that technology. And again, it goes back to collaboration. If not for this funding, I mean, we're in a business that doesn't generate a profit, right? We are subsidized by the taxpayers. And without some assistance from the federal government, particularly in the IIJA, we would not be able to advance our zero emission plan. And that, I think, is something that as an MPO, we're doing planning studies on heat assessments for vulnerable populations. And then what do you do there, right? We have to be water conscious, we're in the desert, but we also have to make sure that we've got people that are waiting for a bus that don't have access to a car, and they are standing at 120 degrees. And so it's about more, canopy, shade canopy with trees and that sort of thing. So sustainability, whatever that looks like, whether it's technology, the traditional technology you think of, or it's human technology, I think is going to be super important. And again, that built environment and what that means for the community which it serves and what you're trying to solve for is going to be really important as well.
Or I'll just offer a brief comment. It's hard to add to everything you all have already said, but there's one part of this whole effort that is interesting. This is a huge relief of funding and investment, but it's not a permanent solution. It's not sustainable. And there is an effort built within it for looking at a national pilot around road usage charge or other types of infrastructure funding mechanisms. And I'm a little bit worried that we'll get distracted by this relief and not focus entirely on how to build and honestly educate around the need for sustainable transportation funding over time. So when I think about that 5 to 10 year horizon, that's the thing I'm maybe most worried about for our country as it relates to transportation. Because I think we've got to figure that out beyond the life of IIJA. And it ends simple. There's privacy implications, there's equity implications, there's all kinds of implications with the way we get the general public and or our national government to support a more sustainable funding model in the future.
Yeah, Chris, you hit something just spot on. This isn't relief, it's a down payment. It's a down payment. When I look at my agency's budget is $4 billion a year. IIJA, the new formula money coming to Washington State, increases my budget by $200 million a year, which is very, very much appreciated. There are other states where there's a larger percentage of the overall budget is federal money, where it's going to have a more significant impact. But the crashes that happen on Washington State's surface transportation system, the state highways, the county roads, that's a $14 billion a year impact on Washington families and Washington businesses. The individual tragedies aside, $14 billion. If we could cut that in half and save Washington $7 billion, Could we do that at a cost of less than $7 billion? I think so, but it's not going to be 200 million. We need significantly more resource in this space, but we need to make the case that we all wind up better for it financially, better for it economically, and better for it in terms of social equity.
Yes, very, very well said, everyone. I want to just mention to everyone, if you want to submit a question, please do so through the Q&A. We do have a question in there that I want to pose to the panel, and I have one or two more. So the first question in the Q&A is, are there examples of prioritizing tech that work for low-income communities? What kinds of informational services need to be provided to have the technologies used to solve problems of those most in need of better transportation options? Who wants to jump in?
I'll just give an example here from Los Angeles. One of the things that the city launched during the pandemic was something called the Angelino Card, which was a preloaded debit card that automatically gets reloaded every month, distributed to a number of folks who were in need of basic things, groceries, day-to-day needs for their families. And we are actually now leveraging that for our mobility wallet. So another thing that happened this week is that LA unlocked funding, sort of city funding, to launch, along with our partners at Metro under Stephanie Wiggins's leadership, to launch the largest mobility wallet pilot in the country. And we're able to do that because we're taking advantage of the Angelino card that's already out there, but it is going to require a lot of stitching together. If a mobility wallet is a package of things that allows you to, get free transit, free access to EV car sharing, free access to electric bikes and bike share, maybe has some vouchers for trips on taxis or on transportation network companies, and maybe has some preloaded value for express lane tolls, right? All of those things use different backend payment platforms. They recognize different types of payment. Some of them are credit card only. Some of them also recognize debit cards. That technology, all of those pieces of technology are going to be what's required for us to get it out to 3,000 people in LA, and that's a drop in the bucket. But most of the investment will be towards figuring out the technology fixes that will enable that to all happen. So I think it's that's why I'm sort of hammering on payment platforms and why that's so important. Is that's going to be the thing that makes brings opportunities like this into focus and makes it easy for people to access.
So Selena's spot on with that. Our ORCA card and our ORCA Lift program for low-income families is a great first step. Expanding that to universal mobility is a great first step, or great next step. Our legislature is considering legislation right now. It's passed out of one house and it's in the other, that is going to provide fare-free rides on every transit system in Washington State, on the Washington State ferry system, and on Amtrak in Washington State for anyone under the age of 18. And that is a significant step. That will make a difference.
Laura, I'll just, one example, and this was something we learned during the pandemic as it relates to equity among all of our passengers. At the onset, it was nobody wanted to touch anything, right? Fare boxes, money, and if you notice, a lot of industries today are still really moved from the contactless, and that's where they are. And so we know that the majority of our customers do have a phone, but there are many that are unbanked. And so we entered into a partnership. We have customers that where they go to pay their power bill or their utility bill, we've got a cash to mobile solution now, so that we wanted to make sure that they at least had the same ability to At the time, we were, the beginning of the pandemic, didn't know what it was going to look like, didn't know how detrimental it was going to be to somebody's health, et cetera. And so we want to make sure that they had the same opportunity as other folks that were banked, not to come in and handle money and touch this and touch the things at the time. I think we're all really concerned about what were on the surfaces. And we did that, and we found some success. Again, it was looking for how do we ensure everyone's being treated the same? And that was the impetus behind that initiative. So we've got today we're about 350 locations where customers can go cash to mobile, so that they have the same opportunities that our other folks do.
One thing I'll just add in, I think that, stepping back a little bit, also making sure that, again, we're bringing in those communities' voices to understand what are their needs. Because I think sometimes, maybe we think we know what they are, but actually being able to engage with those communities and understand, like, is it around access to transportation? Is it around, kind of the safety of the system? Is it that you have to cross like several lanes of like a busy, intersection or lanes of road to be able to get to where you need to go, and that presents like a safety risk, and there's an opportunity to rethink the way like the infrastructure is designed. So I think part of it is also really making sure that we're providing that ability to engage with communities and bring those voices in. And I think that's something that, I just want to underscore, because we don't always know, sitting from wherever we are, what those needs are. So I think that's really important to make sure that the solutions that we're designing, and, whether it's introducing, whatever type of service, that it's really addressing what the needs of that community are.
Just want to add something to that, which is we've been finding more and more, particularly in the changing lanes work that we did around gender equity, is that aggregating data, or, smashing data sets together and looking at averages was painting a really inaccurate picture for us, and that we needed to do really community-based research and actually pay people for their time and their emotional labor to come to the table with us and tell us in their own words some of the things they were struggling with, and the other partners that we work with pretty frequently now are community-based organizations. So it used to be when we created our big pre-qualified bench of firms that could work with the city of Los Angeles and with LADOT, we didn't have a category for nonprofits and community-based organizations. And that's something that we opened up 3 or 4 years ago. It's still incredibly challenging. The insurance they have to carry, the indemnification clauses that are baked into our boilerplate contract language, it's really tough for small nonprofits and community-based organizations. And so that's another piece of being able to use those federal dollars and grant money to actually invest in those partners who are much better equipped to be in community than we are, because they've been in community and they already have those trusted relationships, and really empowering them to be at the table, not when it's time for us to go out and start doing outreach, but actually when we're designing a program, having them at the table. When we designed our EV car sharing program, brought forward a lot of use cases that we otherwise would have overlooked. So I think there's a sort of a harmony that can exist between using our traditional and large data sources that we have access to in transportation, and shifting into and adding community-based research, and then thinking of ourselves as investors, not just in physical infrastructure, but in thriving and high functioning community-based organizations, because we're never going to have the money for me to embed a whole team of LADOT planners in one community over many, many years. That's just not the way transportation money works. And so I think those are kind of some of our thoughtful workarounds that could benefit from a lot more investment.
Yeah, and Salita, I will just say one of the most enlightening and insightful things to me from your Changing Lanes study was the information gathered around trips not taken. And that's not typically how transportation data is you're collecting based on trips taken, and you're not necessarily capturing the trips not taken. And those really, to me, told the story of the real challenges that the people in those groups were facing. And I think it's really important. We've heard that before, that community engagement, and I know, you're talking about at the design stage, but whatever stage, it's expensive. And so there's a real need to invest there. And you're right, transportation agencies can't do it alone. So we're almost out of time. I do want to pose one last lightning round question to everyone, just if you can answer, in 30 seconds or a minute. We've talked about the fact that the IIJA funding is a down payment and is one time. So we know that there's more needed, but in your opinion, what is the greatest opportunity we have for transformation with this funding that in the IIJA?
So Laura, I think given our region here in the Southwest, for us, it is around clean energy transmission and electric vehicle infrastructure. I think, again, without this down payment, without this additional funding, we would not be able to advance this, whether it's, it is a state goal, it's a federal goal, we would not be able to move forward in a meaningful way without this infrastructure. So for us, we're going to try and go big there.
I think the shift to a safe systems approach is a seismic event at USDOT. And I think that it's incumbent on all of us to positively reinforce that shift and bring accountability to that shift in the way that we apply for the funding and how we implement it. I think the other big transformative opportunity under this USDOT's leadership is really bringing up and elevating racial equity as a key consideration in how we select our projects and where we focus investment. And again, an opportunity for us to positively reinforce that shift and have accountability go both ways. To Manali's points and to everybody's points, it cannot be these projects cannot emerge from a top-down process and stick and have staying power. They have to result from genuine, authentic community engagement. So I think that's what I'm hoping for.
Roger?
Okay, well, I'm hoping for, we're like the dog that caught the car. Now we've got this IIJA funding, and here in my state, we've also got new state funding, but values-based, data-informed delivery of these programs, showing the public that we can do good with these resources is my top priority, because I want the opportunity to have more resources. I want to see the next bill and the one after that and the one after that, and get transportation funding in the United States to where it needs to be.
Chris?
I'm going to make a bit of a stretch here, but I am hoping that this down payment, this investment, will attract kind of the next generation of transportation professionals to both our public agencies and our private sector. We need more workforce, and I think that the next generation will come in with what many of us, are trying hard to push forward now, with the ability to address equity and the ability to address climate change.
Well said. And Manali?
Yeah, I mean, I know talking to many people, I feel like we kind of recognize there's a window of opportunity where these topics like equity and climate resilience, they have risen to the top. And so I feel like it's really important for us to take advantage of that and make an impact during this time, bring those lenses into our investment decisions.
Thank you. Well, thank you, all of you. I really appreciate your participation today and the conversation. We are at time, but I just want to say a couple quick things I wrote down during the conversation as takeaways. Building trust is paramount between public and private sectors. A joyful co-creation model is the key to success. Being a part of the team, expanding your definition of what the team actually is. And then also this concept of workforce as infrastructure. I think that is something that that really, if the industry could get behind, is critical. And of course, we'll add that all of us on this call and at ITS America support diversification of the future transportation workforce. So thank you so much for your time. We look forward to continuing this conversation through our work in ITS America, and have a wonderful day.